this is a most interesting book in the Bible. And this is one of the wisdom books. There are
Ecclesiastes.
yes, correct.
Right after Proverbs.
Right after Proverbs. There are 5 books known as the wisdom books in the Bible. And they're Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon. And some preacher looked at them and just looked at the overview of the books, and he said, well, basically what you have in Job is the unhappy man because he's suffering. But in Psalms, you have the happy man because he's got a relationship with God. Psalms is a great book for prayer. In the book of Proverbs, you've got the wise man because the book of Proverbs was God's wisdom given to Solomon. And in the book of Ecclesiastes that we're going to study is the worldly man. And this is going to study the wisdom of the world. And then finally, the book of the Song of Solomon, the heavenly man, because that's when it says, come up, my fair one, and rise and be with me. But those are the 5 wisdom books. But Ecclesiastes is a picture, the key word, the key phrase, let me see, is, let's read the first 3 verses. The words of the preacher, of the son of David, the king in Jerusalem. So the author is Solomon. He's David's son. He's the king in Jerusalem. He's the last one that can ever use that title, king in Jerusalem, right? Because after him, the nation divides. And now if you're going to be the king of Israel, you're not in Jerusalem anymore, you're up in Samaria. And if you're going to be the king in Jerusalem, you're not the king of all Israel anymore, you're just the king of Judah. So he's the last one that is the true king residing in Jerusalem of all of Israel. And he writes as a preacher at the end of his life, having observed life, vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man of all his labor, which he taketh, and here's the key, under the sun. That phrase is found 29 times in the book. So what he's going to talk about, Solomon, a very wise man, when he was, I think, 19 years old, when his father died, and he was put on the throne in Jerusalem, and he's taking over at 19 years old. He doesn't know what to do, and so he prays to God in the book of Kings, give me wisdom. Lord, I don't know what to do at 19, I need wisdom. And God says, since you asked for wisdom, and you didn't ask for money, and you didn't ask for long life, and you didn't ask for power or extended kingdom or lots of women, all you asked for is wisdom. I'm going to give you wisdom, and I'm going to give you other blessings, but I'm going to give you wisdom. And God gave him the wisdom, and with the wisdom, in the first few years of his life, 19 through 22, 23, he wrote Proverbs. That's heavenly wisdom by God. So when you read the book of Proverbs, you're reading God's wisdom. Then he lives for another 40 years. And by the time he's 59, and you read about his life, and he meets a lot of other kings from other countries, and he meets a lot of women, and he takes 700 wives, and 300 concubines. Now look, a lot of the wives he took out of convenience. There were a lot of little fiefdoms back then, little city-states, and they had a little local king, and the king had a daughter, and one of the things that used to happen was wars would always break out, and he figured, look, if I take this king's daughter as one of the wives in my harem, then that king isn't going to attack my country. It's a political way of, why would he attack a place where his daughter is? And so a lot of these were taken. And over the years, though, meeting these other people and hearing these other women, he learned about other forms of religion. He saw other ways of how people live. And at the age of 56, 7, 8, he writes this book, which is his observations of what life is like around the world under the sun. And it's basically a philosophy book. This is the favorite book of lost people. Why is that? Because lost people don't know anything about life over the sun. They don't know anything about heaven. But any philosopher down here who's had an opportunity to observe life goes, wow, that book of Ecclesiastes kind of hits the nail on the head. And then Mark Twain loved it. All the lost writers, Hemingway, they all loved Ecclesiastes. It was their favorite book. And curiously, this is a philosophy book. It covers empiricism. It covers rationalism. It covers agnosticism. It covers just about every type of ism you can come up with. And it covers hedonism. It covers Epicureanism, Stoicism. It's all covered in the book. But he finds it's all vanity. No matter which course you take, it ends up like a dead end. And the curious thing is, this book is written by him 350 years before the first philosopher ever showed up in Greece. That would be Thales of Miletus, is the first philosopher in Greece around 600 BC. And here he's writing this book 950 BC. And I know the world, because the world, which is contrary to God, and the world, which is run by men contrary to God, in every place, writes world history and leaves out God's people and God's truth. So the world writes its histories. So when it writes its history, it gives all this notoriety and glory to the Greeks and their philosophers, when he said everything they said 350 years before the first one came along. But he happened to be one of God's people, so we don't talk about him. We'll admit in our own writings we like this book, but we talk about Socrates and Plato. He covered Socrates and Plato before they were 6 centuries before they were diapered by their mom and dad. So I mean, he's way ahead of them. God's people are always ahead of the world. This book is always ahead of anything the world has. That's one of the things you learn in it.
What was the year that he wrote this in?
About 950 BC. Yeah. So way ahead. The great philosophers hit the scene. I mean, the major ones we study, what, the 300 BC, 200 BC? That's when they hit the scene. So he's way, way ahead of them. But God's always way ahead of everything. I mean, God knew the earth was round a long time before Columbus sailed.
Amen.
He told Isaiah in 700 BC. I mean, there's all these truths you'll find in the Bible about the blood circulation and Harvey and all this stuff. That's in the book of Leviticus and Proverbs. Thousands of years before the doctors figured it out. All these truths are in here, and so he's just looking at it as a philosopher, and the key word is understanding it's under the sun. Everything that's under the sun. So the doc is, go ahead. Yes.
I don't know if it was you, but everything, nothing new under the sun, and then you told me that, or I read someplace, doesn't include God.
Of course it doesn't include God.
Oh, well, I don't
He's
know.
making that's why this book is here. God wants to show you, in the book, I'm going to show you many things. I'm going to show you many things about me. I'm going to show, that's me, God.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you many things about how I reach out to man. I'm even going to show you what man does when he's left to his own devices and how he thinks.
Okay.
So I want to show you, I can tell you how he thinks. I know what his thoughts are before he comes up with them. And let me allow one of my men to give all these thoughts to you.
Okay.
So you can save all the philosophy books, read Ecclesiastes, and you'll find out it's vanity.
Yeah.
It's vanity. Seriously, any philosopher you know is still searching. Is he not?
Yeah.
Still searching. He doesn't come, I found it all,
No.
come to me. We're still searching. Any scientist is still searching.
Yeah.
Why are you searching? Because you haven't arrived at truth.
Right.
Once you arrive at truth, you're not searching anymore.
Amen.
Probably all of you in this room at one point were searching, but once you
Yeah.
found Jesus Christ, who is the truth,
Right.
and the
Yeah.
Word of God, which is the Word of
Yeah.
truth, are you searching anymore?
No.
Are you trying other religions? Are you trying
No.
other cults? You don't need to.
No.
You've arrived
Yeah.
because you found
Right.
truth.
Amen.
So that's all he's saying. It's vanity. We're still looking. We're looking.
Yeah.
Yes. He's not stating his religious convictions here. He's just recording what any natural, rationalistic philosopher would think while trying to unravel the mysteries on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And he's looked at all these different people, and he's looked at all these different ways, and he says, you know what it comes up to? It's just vanity. It's empty. There seems to be no answer in this stuff.
That's right, because
Is this coffee?
when
It's
I was-
warm water. Oh,
when I was into spiritualism, that wasn't satisfying anything. Now I was-
Spiritualism is another ism.
Yeah.
And when he looks at that, they really don't.
And every time I looked for Jesus, it was on a liberals. Wow.
Like up here on the board, the only way you're gonna know is through
Yeah.
revelation. And that's above the line of man's knowledge. That's the brass ceiling you can't penetrate. Here he's looking at philosophy and all the various forms of
Yeah.
it. He's even going to look at some science. He's going to start out right there in the next few verses. Let's see. One generation passeth away, another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. From the natural man's standpoint, that's the way he sees it. These people think the earth is going to continue forever. That's why they're worried about it. We got to protect the earth. We got to protect the earth. We got to, what for? And we already know from the Bible it's not going to abide forever. God intends to destroy the earth. 2 Peter chapter 3. He's going to burn the earth up because it's corrupted, and he's going to make a new heavens and a new earth because there's corruption in this one, and God after a while is going to be fed up with the corruption and sin and put it away. And you got to be on board with him to get to the other side. And but from a natural man's standpoint, the earth abideth forever. From a natural man's standpoint, the sun ariseth, the sun goes down, and hastes to his place where it rose. It just goes round and round. The wind goes toward the south. It turns back to the north. It whirls continually. The wind returns. Again, according to the circuits, he's looking at astronomy. He's looking at meteorology. He's looking at all the rivers run into the sea, but the sea's not full. Under the place from whence the rivers come, they return there. He's looking at hydrology. The fact that, by the way, making some true scientific observations, there is a regularity to observe to nature. It's a regular sun periodic system, okay? People talk about climate change. Yeah, climate changes every day. When the sun is near us, it's warmer. When the sun's on the other side of the earth, it's colder. I mean, when we're close to the sun, in summer it's warmer. When we're far from the sun, it's colder. It's winter. I mean, yes, this is all natural truths that one can observe even under the sun. He's not saying that everything these people, every observation they make is wrong. They're going to make even some right observations, but they're just natural observations. And when you're trying to figure out above the sun, it's vanity. Because down here, it just seems to be the same over and over and over and over. Yeah.
It seems like they really can't go, and this is the way I look at it, they really can't go further past the sun. I mean, they try to search elsewhere, but there's really, that's all vanity, trying to search elsewhere in the universe. I mean, you gotta deal with what's here, but they can't go any further than that.
And the amazing thing in verse 7 is here's this guy, and he's writing 950 BC. And basically what he's talking about is the rivers run into the sea, but the sea is not full. The place from whence the rivers come, thither they return. Basically he's saying is there seems to be a water cycle going on.
Yep.
I don't understand it. Now, later on, we found out the threes?
Yes.
Three big words, right? There's evaporation, then there's condensation, then there's precipitation, then there's evaporation, then there's condensation, then there's precipitation, and the hydrological cycle is going on, and we haven't lost one drop of water since God created the earth.
Amen. That's right.
We're losing water. We can't run out of water. It's impossible. You've got as many H2O molecules today as you had back when God made the earth, and it's just this cycle is going on.
Amen.
And we don't seem to be getting anywhere. It seems vanity if we're just following the cycles. People often talk about logic. They say, you use circular logic. Well, the only good logic is circular. A should go to B, should go to C, should go to D, should go to E, it should come back to A, and it should connect. The question is, which circle are you looking at? The one under the sun or the one above the sun? Are you looking at the temporal circular logic, which is what lost people do, or eternal circular logic? Your logic is circular, starts in Genesis, goes all the way through, and finishes in Revelation, and connects right back to Genesis, but it's the wisdom from above the sun. You're in the larger circle. They're in the smaller circle.
Oh.
True logic is circular. The question is, which circle are you standing in? You're standing in God's circle or in man's circle? Man's is limited, and that's what he's observing. He's observing in verse 8, all things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The workings of nature and the world is so much man can't get it all together. So let's say somebody wants to be a naturalist and wants to study let's say, how do these trees work through the carbon cycle? And then he just learns some basic things. Then he goes a little bit further and he finds, oh wait, inside the tree, there's a photosynthetic thing going on with the carbon moving that way. And then there's a Krebs cycle turning that carbon into energy, and he keeps going and going, and then, well, wait a second, but then in the Krebs cycle, there's this, and he keeps learning and learning and learning, and that's just one thing he's studying. Then if he wants to study the relationship of all the animals, he starts studying the animals, then he learns comparative anatomy, then he looks at the actual makeup of them, then he looks at the tissues, then the organs, then inside the cells, and notice how the knowledge keeps, you can't utter all of it. There's so much God's packed into the creation down here that it's beyond man's ability to get it all. And we keep learning and ever learning and never come to a knowledge of the truth, which is Jesus Christ. Science is limited. Philosophy is limited. All this study, all this stuff going on down here, we really can't fill it all up. If all the things Jesus did were ever put in books, then probably the world couldn't contain them. I mean, medicine, we're still studying, we were just talking earlier this morning about the making of how a baby is made. And the amazing thing, how one cell, the very first cell, when the baby's made, the sperm hits the egg, and we got a new being created there. And then the cells multiply, and then all of a sudden, these cells, which can be anything, break into 3 cell lines. And some of them magically become endodermal cells. And some of them magically become mesodermal cells. And some of them magically become ectodermal, endoderm, mesoderm, boom. And then all of a sudden, those cells reproduce, and then all of a sudden, some of the mesodermal cells say, I'm going to be muscle cells. And some of them say, no, I'm going to be bone cells. Why is this? What is going on here? And those are questions nobody can answer. And we observe it and go, wow, how does this all happen? Well, it happens because of God putting it in there and directing these things. The hidden forces, the great mystery of godliness as he's doing his work and making these little souls and making these little beings.
Yeah, I remember one time when Magali was having her first baby. We went to Lama's class, and they had this movie called The Miracle of Life.
Yes.
Back then, and I saw this and I was just amazed as to, they actually show how the eggs unite and this baby is actually formed inside a woman's womb. But the doctors, they can try to explain it, but they can't explain what he said.
No. We observe and go, wow.
See what's happening, how it's happening.
What may be happening, we don't know how it's happening or why it's happening, but then we get a Bible and we find out, well, there's the how and why everything is the Creator God, and he's intimately involved with the work down here. But under the sun, I can't see it. I can't utter it. Another thing I find about people is the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Something he knows about men when he went from place to place, and from kingdom to kingdom, and from village to village, is people always like seeing new things and hearing new things. Now, that's how television exists. I mean, one of the producers in Hollywood, I can't remember, I got it written down somewhere, and I lost it, but this producer said that there are only 7 basic storylines in every movie. 7 basic storylines. He talked about them: boy meets girl, a redemption, somebody makes a mistake and then they get redeemed. And he went through the 7 basic plots. He said that's all there are. The 7, by the way, every one of those plots he got saved. He said they're all found in the Bible. Every one of those stories is found in the Bible. 7 is kind of God's number of completion. And so the 7 plots, you would think after you've seen the 7 plots, you never need to see another one. But we'll watch it again. We'll watch the same plot with just different characters and different labels, but it's the same thing happening all over again. It's a story of boy meets girl. It's a story of redemption. It's a story of this, whatever it is. And we're watching it again, and the eye's not satisfied with seeing. And let's say a guy who gets into, maybe enjoys seeing for the first time a centerfold and a Playboy. He should, okay, I've seen one, that's enough. Is it? Does it end there? Okay, the eye's not satisfied with seeing. There's just something about the natural man. There's a lust inside him that he's observing, keeps going, and the ear's not satisfied with hearing. And so the phone call comes from the one girl to the other. Did you hear what Sylvia's husband did last night? No, he was out. And, okay, you think that'd be enough? I heard one story of this. No, and then next week it's someone else, and it's just hearing, and it goes on and on and on with the same stories and the same gossip and the same pictures and the same plots over and over, and people just, he's making observations about natural people. They have an itch, and they keep scratching it, and they never seem to be satisfied.
You have a soap opera then.
Yeah, there you go, the soap opera.
We have the same story.
You got some
Yeah,
soap
yeah.
operas, they've
Lots of
been
soap
on for
operas.
50 years.
Yeah.
The same stories over and over again.
Yeah, same story.
There's always some evil person.
Makes you realize what
Oh,
a
yeah,
joke-
always.
It makes you realize what a
Yep.
joke mankind is.
Well, I mean,
What a joke.
yeah, fallen mankind,
Yeah, yeah.
left to himself, is vanity of vanities. It's all vanity, verse 2. This is the observation of someone that's wise. That's why he's gonna say later on in the same chapter, notice verse 17 and 18. I gave my heart to know wisdom, he means under the sun, okay? Not God's wisdom. And to know madness and folly under the sun. And I perceived its vexation of spirit, whether I become a wise philosopher, or whether I become a drunk in a bar, or someone who's shooting heroin, it's all vexation. And here verse 18, for in much wisdom is much grief. And he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. In other words, ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
Because once I start seeing what's going on down here, it'll frighten me. I mean, I don't want to know about some of the things that are going on in the Mideast right now, what they're doing to people. I don't want to know about some of the gulags that were in the Soviet Union. I don't want to know about the concentration camps that were in Germany in the 30s. I don't want to hear about it. I mean, this is just, it's better to be ignorant and go with rose-colored glasses, humankind. Unfortunately, he's going to show you at the end of the book that if you don't get to meet God, one day the rose-colored glasses come off, and you're gonna find out it's all vanity anyways, including for you.
Yes, right.
So there is an end to all of this, but ignorance is kind of bliss. Because I don't wanna know we were talking the other day about the Bohemian Grove.
Yes.
You don't wanna know about that. You probably don't even know what it is.
That is on,
You don't need to know.
That
Is it
video is on
available?
there.
Is it available?
Yeah, you could,
Oh, jeez, you don't even wanna know. There's better things you don't wanna know about stuff that's going on. And some of the places where the great leaders of the world go and have their worship services, their Baalite worship services,
Yeah.
where our
Yeah.
presidents have gone
Yeah.
and attended. It's just incredible. Somebody snuck a camera and I don't know how.
Yeah.
they have a ritual, where I didn't have time to really look at it. It was disturbing, I didn't have time to look at it. But they have the ritual is they burn a coffin with care. In other words, you're supposed to put all your cares into this coffin,
Yeah,
and it goes up there by that owl, and they burn it.
yeah.
In other words, so it's hedonism, so you know, just,
But these are the leaders of the world. Our
it's
presidents.
disturbing.
It's just.
Anybody is anybody.
Yeah, you don't wanna know about this stuff. It's better not to know, because in much wisdom of the world is grief. And you get sorrowful. What the heck kind of people do we have running things around here?
Well, someone said that they were reading about Chelsea, and she was congratulating the devil worshippers or something like that.
I wouldn't doubt, so it's better not to know that stuff. But here, he's showing. And the truth of the matter is, most people who have, I haven't spent a lot of time with them, but there was a movie once about it called Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Yeah.
And you got these professors at a college, and these are professors, they have worldly wisdom, and look at the grief and the sorrow and the misery of their life. You would think all that wisdom would make them, put them on top of the world, and give them a great attitude. I have understanding. No, it's burdening me, because it's a wisdom of, let me show you the wisdom that he's getting under the sun. Go to the book of James in the back of your Bible.
Just listen.
The wisdom that he's getting is verse 14 and 15 of chapter 3. And this is what happens in these professors in universities. And you're amazed to see how bitter and angry and the vitriol and the hatred in their hearts. You think they would be great lovers of mankind, and they're haters of people. And it's very sad. And James chapter 3, verse 14. If you have bitter envying and strife in your hearts. Where does it come from? Verse 15. This type of wisdom that brings that descendeth not from above. It didn't come from heaven. It's earthly. It's sensual. It's devilish. You're trying to, your body is trying to fulfill its lust through the senses. It's getting the earthly wisdom of philosophers. It's getting some of the unclean wisdom from the devil. And it brings, verse 16, envying and strife and confusion and every evil work. He'll talk about communism in Proverbs and in here in these books. Those are confused evil works. To think that somehow people will exist in a socialist or communist state. They won't. Yes, brother?
How, as a person who believes in the Bible, how are we supposed to live our lives with all this?
Well, the first thing that is...
We all think that Hitler was a bad man. Hitler was a bad man.
Okay.
He killed 6 billion Jews. Well, I came from the Vietnam War. And America killed 4 million Vietnamese.
Okay.
For nothing.
For nothing.
How am I supposed to live with that?
Okay. Well, you're not expected. I mean, you're not the judge of the earth. You're not God. What God wants you to do is looking at like Ecclesiastes and go, this is vanity. And there doesn't seem to be an answer down here to the confusion and the evil work. I want to get away from evil. I want to get to good. And Jesus said, God is good. Truth is good. So you come to the truth and you embrace the Lord. You receive the gift of the new birth. And then God begins to take you in a new direction, which is contrary to this confusion in the world. And he takes you down a path of truth.
Okay.
But the only way you can do it is by coming to the Savior and coming to God. Otherwise, you'll be grieved and sorrowful and frustrated and confused and looking like there is no hope, and there is no hope in the world. That's one of the things the preacher's saying. The hope of the world is vain. There is no end to this thing. As a matter of fact, he's going to say in verse 9, the thing that hath been is that which shall be. And that which is done is that which shall be done. There's no new thing under the sun. These processes of nations and mankind and philosophies and different ways of running things are going to repeat over and over and over. And so one of the things he's trying to say is, as a teacher, we want to learn something from history so we don't repeat it. What he's learning from history is going to go over and over and over. Verse 10, he's going to say, when you really look at it, is there anything where it may be said, this is new? It's already been of old time, which was before us. For example, in the 60s, they said we're going to go to the new morality. The new morality is free love. Make love, not war. Okay? That's as old as Genesis 4. They were sleeping around with different people back in Genesis 4. That was one of the first problems when the world began, when they left the garden. What's his name? I can't remember his name. The guy that said, come and hearken to my speech. Lamech. He went out and got a couple of wives. He had a couple of concubines. I mean, sleeping around in free love. There's nothing new about it. We just put a new label on it, but it's the same stuff.
Yeah.
Pastor, is that comparable to that verse there, to James in chapter 4, where verse 2, it says, you lust and have not, you kill and desire to have, and cannot obtain, you fight in war, yet you have not because you ask not, you ask and receive not because you ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lust.
There you go. The sensual lust, the earthly lusts. And an earthly and a sensual lust actually brings me down to the level of a beast. I mean, the one thing that God gave man that he didn't give to the beast is the spirit that has the ability to commune with God and to ask questions that my cat never asked. He never come to me, and he's a doctor, Dr. Hussenfeld, and he's never come to me and said, where did I come from? What is my purpose here? How should I live? Where am I going when I die? He never asked those questions, but men ask those questions. Okay? Now, how does my cat live? Only two things. I'm hungry,
Yes.
I want food, and when I want to, and there's a female cat, and that's about it. And he lives like a living nerve. And right now this nerve is a hungry nerve, and right now this nerve wants to be pleasure nerve, and that's it. And what happens to us When we stop thinking about the great questions and
Yeah.
thinking about beyond and where we came from, is we descend to the level of a beast, and we live in that manner where we just wanna satisfy our
Yeah.
lusts.
It never ends.
Yeah,
It never ends.
and
The evil in this world will never end.
well, not by us. Now, thankfully, the Lord will put an end to it.
Yeah.
What we're learning about, one of the great questions that's often asked is if God is all powerful, and He is, and if God is love, and He is, then why is there evil in the world? And what you're forgetting is one other part of that equation. God is all powerful, and He is loving, but God is eternal. He's not temporal. So He doesn't have to exercise those attributes. He's not forced to do it within time now. But when He's ready, there is two verses in the Bible that will show you. Go to Revelation. This is why you need Revelation. You won't know the answers. Go to chapter 10. There is a time when He's going to wind this up. He wound the clock up at the beginning. There's a time when He's going to turn the clock off and get rid of it. And that's what He's going to say. Revelation chapter 10. And this is when Jesus is coming down in verse 5, the angel, the appearance of Jesus, which I saw standing upon the sea and upon the earth. He's got, remember, Jesus could walk on water. He's got one foot on the sea and one on the earth. And He's lifting up His hand, and He's swearing by Him that liveth forever, His Father, who created heaven and the things that are there. And He says at the end of the verse, there should be time no longer. What God determined to do, He was in eternity. And He said, I want to try an experiment. And I want to run an experiment, and I want to make a heaven, I want to make an earth, and I want to run inside this experimental laboratory. I'm going to begin time. In the beginning, I'm going to start a clock going, and I'm going to put creatures in here, and I'm going to run this experiment. Now, what He's observing is in the experiment, the creatures are making the thing go around. They're messing the whole thing up. One of the ingredients is messing everything up. And He says, and I'm going to allow this to run so long, and there's a day when there will be time no longer. I'm going to end the clock. And then, with my power and my love, I'm going to put the evil away. And then, next chapter of Revelation 11, verse 15, and the final seventh angel will sound, and there's great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world, this evil world, with the evil leaders in most of the kingdoms of this world. We've had a couple of good ones, but even they went bad. Israel started out good, but just like a human being eventually descends near a period of death, Israel descended. England was good for a while, and then it descended. America tried with the Bible, and then it got into the liberalism and got rid of the Bible and replaced it with a newspaper and the media, and people are thinking wrong and voting wrong and living wrong, and it's descending. And the kingdoms of this world are a mess, and now the kingdoms of the world become the kingdoms of the Lord and of Christ. And Jesus will come over, and now God will do what everyone's been asking to do. He's going to end the evil. He's going to end time. He's going to finally exercise His power and fix it. And the question is, when He does that, which side are you on? Are you on the side of the earth and the world and the evil, or are you on the side of God and Christ and good? And then you're one of the sheep, you get to go with Him. You're one of the goats, you get to go that way, and He'll do the division. But when He's ready, and He's not quite ready in 2019, but He will be in the next 30 years to get this thing done. And it'll get done. Because we always knew it would be about 2,000 years from when His Son died on the cross, like He said. Back to where we are in Ecclesiastes. Good philosophy book. Miles ahead of the Greek philosophers. Pretty impressive, huh? The Greeks seek after wisdom, but the Jews had it over them every day. Yes, brother.
Part of that discussion that was going on there is, like Germany, Hitler killed this many, this guy killed that many. What's left out of the equation is the human heart, and that's the real problem. It's, but wait, I'm gonna go somewhere, because that's what is going on now. They always promise utopia,
Yes.
like AOC, right?
Yes.
Oh, we're gonna have this new deal, we're gonna have this, we're gonna do that. They're always promising utopia. They set this group against that group to gain power. And the people that do this are failures as far as life.
Yes,
And so you had Hitler was a failed artist
Yes.
living in poverty.
yes,
It's the people that have no good intentions. What their intention is, I want power, I want money,
Sure.
I want this, I want that. It's
Sure.
their heart problem. And so you have people like Cortez,
Yes.
AOC,
Yes.
she was a bartender.
yes.
Yeah.
Now she's in Congress.
Yes.
You've got, what's the guy in Venezuela?
Maduro or?
Maduro. He was a bus driver.
Yes.
He's running the country now. Hitler was a failed artist.
Yes.
The people that have no talents, no abilities, nothing to offer,
Yes.
the way for them to get a free ride is to manipulate other people because of their bad heart, and they know how to manipulate people.
Sure.
They're con artists.
Sure.
And I'm gonna
Sure.
take the ride, I'm gonna be on the top of the heap, and all you people are gonna be below me.
Well-
And the problem is wicked hearts that cause
Sure, the
these
evil
problems.
heart, the Bible does diagnose what the psychology books will not diagnose. And the psychology books do not have the word sin in it.
Yep.
And they don't have evil in there, and they don't have wicked in there, but they have a lot of new swelling fancy words that they made up that don't mean anything. And, but the Bible is a true psychology book, psycho, soul, logos, study of the soul, study of the heart. And it says the heart of mankind is deceitful. It will deceive others, it can be deceived itself, and if given enough time, it will become desperately wicked. If you allow the deceit to go on and on and on, deceit only leads you downhill to a valley of desperate wickedness. And these are the people who have completely seared their conscience. Most people are, well, I shouldn't have done that. But they're at the point where they're comfortable doing evil, and comfortable stealing, and comfortable killing people to make their ends. They're like their father, the devil, a murderer and a liar, and they
Free
follow
school.
right down to desperate
Free
wickedness.
school, free
Listen-
healthcare.
listen what Rockman said.
You can keep your doctor.
I recorded this 14-second
Who's
bit.
gonna turn out of it? It's free.
There you go.
He's talking about the liberals, the ones that are
Okay.
concerned
And-
about
and
social
what
issues
he was
and all.
basically
He said
saying-
they're concerned about racial issues, social issues and whatnot, but not about the sin in their own lives.
Correct.
Projection.
Yes.
Who was that?
You know, you're
That was wrong.
racist.
Oh, it was rough.
Well, I was
The doc.
watching it, just a good little bit, I had to do it again, I still wanna meditate on that, you know?
And so what the philosopher's saying here is really end of verse 9, there's no new thing under the sun. We're repeating the same mistakes over and over and over. Every generation seems to repeat them. Verse 11, there's no remembrance of former things. Now, occasionally there is someone that will come along and try and study the past and learn from it. Thank God. And they'll be what's known as, maybe we'll call them a social prophet. They're not a spiritual prophet. A spiritual prophet will preach the word and preach Christ. But a social prophet will preach societal history. Probably the first great one in our country would have been Adam Smith in 1776. And he looked back at the history of mankind, and he wrote a book called An Inquiry into the History of the Wealth of Nations. And he looked back over a 3,000-year period, and he said, as I look at the landscape of the history of mankind, the majority of nations, people live in squalor, they struggle, they live hard lives, they die in poverty, there's wicked governments, most nations are just pitiful, like the African countries. It's just, even though there's resources there, nothing's going on. He said, but every so often there comes along a nation that actually progresses and builds and attains something, and the people get to work. And he noticed, he said, and the only time that ever happens is when they have a free market economy rather than a regulated economy.
Yes.
And when the people are allowed to work, the greatest resource God put on this planet are those who are made in his image. It's people. The greatest resource is not the gas under the ground. It's not the gold in the mines. It's not the trees in the forests. It's the people. Because the people get the gold out of the mines, they cut down the trees in the forest and they make the buildings, they get the gas out and they make combustion engines so people can move about freely and get to their jobs easier. This is the resources, the people. And he said, when you got a free market economy where a person is allowed to go out and exercise whatever his skill may be to the max, he not only makes money for himself, but he helps his neighbor because he happens to be good at building houses. The neighbor gets a house, and yes, he gets some money out of it, but there's 2 houses rather than 1 built, there's 3. And there's this multiplying. He said, so what we need to do in America is we need to set up a free market economy. If we regulate the economy and tell these people what they're gonna do, rather than let them do what their God-given gifts are, we will limit the wealth. So a social profit comes along. Well, good for him, yeah.
And that's what happened during the Obama administration.
Well, Obama, yeah.
I mean, they were limiting with all these regulations.
Well,
They were
that's,
opposing
that-
it, and the
yes.
businesses were going someplace else.
Yes. And liberalism is a form of, liberalism is the seed that becomes the sapling of socialism that grows into the crabapple tree of communism. They're the same seed in 3 different forms of growth. And liberalism began to creep into our country in the late 1800s. Until then, we were basically a free market society, and America went from, let's see, what was there in 1776 and what was there by 1896? The whole world said, what the heck happened there? Look at Pittsburgh, look at New York, look at what the heck happened in 120 years. How come this isn't going on anywhere else? And by then we got subways in 1890, we've got all these things built up. How did this happen? Because the people were allowed to freely, so a social profit, that's good, that's good. How did he do that? Verse 11, he remembered the former things.
Yeah.
Social profit. And so we followed that and said, hey, that's a good way. But that's the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah.
Has the rule, there's really no remembrance of former things. So let's say I got this girl with the occasional cortex, what's her name?
Very
An
occasional.
afflicted occasional cortex, okay. So we got this girl here, and she's preaching a form of government
Yeah.
that doesn't work. Well, how far back do I have to go to know it doesn't work? Was not the 20th century one of the greatest examples
Yeah.
that socialism in Germany, Nazism was the National Socialist Party, so believe in socialism on a national scale. The Soviet Union, which was an international Soviet party, Cuba, Venezuela, everywhere we've tried socialism, it hasn't worked.
No.
If there's any remembrance of just a few decades ago, you gotta go put her back in a bar and let her serve people, but don't let her be in charge, but there's no remembrance of former
That's what gets
things.
her out of the bar.
Pardon?
That's what gets her out of being a bartender.
But
She wrote it
the
to
smart
job.
people would put her back in the bar.
Yes.
And
yes.
say, you're a good
Obama
bartender,
was the
honey.
same thing.
Go
He was a
do what your
community
gifts are.
organizer.
Go
He was
to
one
the
of
bar.
What experience?
And
Community
since,
organizer around the country.
and like he's saying here in verse 11, since there's no remember of the former
By
things,
offering this stuff, free stuff.
and, yes, and since there's
Free
no
stuff.
remembrance
Free.
of the form, yeah, but in order,
She's gonna use your money.
well,
Your money.
the only way I
What
get
you-
things away for free is I have to confiscate them from
Yeah.
others.
Yeah.
And the one
Too
thing,
much anyway.
the one thing that the social prophet Adam Smith observed is he said, okay, now I know, let's say there is a guy and he's good at building houses, or he's good at building furniture, or whatever he's good at baking pies, or whatever his talent is. Now look, I know in his lustful heart, he's a sinner, and he'd like to be a millionaire and just live his life in luxury. But the reality in the marketplace is, so maybe he'd like to swindle his customers. I'll bake a pie with the cheapest ingredients and sell it at the highest price. But the problem is, the invisible way God works the free market, it's called the invisible hand, Adam Smith observed, is that if he gives a bad or an inferior product, no one will buy from him and he goes out of business.
Right.
So he is forced, in order to make the money, I gotta work harder and give a better product or a better service at the best price. And so the invisible hand is forcing everyone to benefit. It's not a perfect system, but it's the best on a fallen planet, on a planet that goes round and round under the sun. It's the best for my creature down here. It even checks their evil conscience, because they gotta, if I'm a bad businessman, I'm gonna be run out of business in there, and I gotta move from town to town, and my best hope is to establish integrity and relationship so my kids have something, and I'm forced to work harder and put overtime in. It's a win-win situation. My customer benefits, me and my family benefit. That's the way I gotta do it. The invisible hand is in there. But, so, when you've got socialism, I'm gonna give it to you for free, then I have to take from those people who are working and making, and as you start taking from them, you say, listen, like they did in the Soviet Union, you can farm as much as you want, we're gonna take 100% of what you make. And the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union in 1905, before the Russians took over, before the Soviets took over, was the #1 producer of wheat in the world.
Wow.
It had a wheat and a bread basket bigger than America, and it produced wheat better than America. But when the communists came over and they said to the farmers, you can make all the wheat you want, we're gonna take 100% of it, they stopped, and within 5 years after the Soviets taken over, they had to import wheat, because the people wouldn't work anymore. They're not stupid. You've gotta give them some incentive. And so there's no remembrance of former things. Neither shall there be remembrance of the things that are to come with those that shall come after. And then one of the sad things is people have a short memory. And one of the things God wants is beyond you having a memory of history or sociology that's generational or centuries, how about in your own life? Have you remembered some of the things in your own life? Have you observed your own mistakes and said, I don't want to make that mistake a second time? And God wants us, and the preacher's going, it's vanity of vanities. It's not only just on a national level and on a social level and on a citywide level, it's on a family and a personal level. And that's a very sad truth that he's observing as a philosopher, and it's giving him wisdom and grief and sorrow as he's looking at all these things. And that's what will happen. And he's just, again, the observation is if you continue to live your life under the sun without God, it's going to be very frustrating, and mistakes are going to be repeated over and over, not only in your nation's life, but maybe in your own and in your family's life. And ultimately what you got to do is get back to God. And that's what the preacher's trying to show in this book. And so we'll look at more next week, but any other discussions? Got a few minutes left. Yes?
I noticed too, talking about the economy, when I first started buying organic vegetables and fruits, they're way more expensive than regular. But now, when I'm buying them, they're way down. You know, they're either the same price or they're cheaper.
Okay. Now, I haven't,
Yeah, I've seen them.
okay. I haven't studied this out, to be honest with you, so I don't know. But at the point we're at now, there's so much confusion and error in corruption in just about every aspect of every industry nowadays, whether it be the farming industry, the insurance industry, the medical industry, the automotive industry. There's such confusion that's entered in. Honey, I don't have an answer for it. The only answer I've been able to find is that this. When God, she's got the answer, so go ahead.
Well, I have an answer.
Okay, yes.
Back a long time ago, there were hardly any organic farmers. Now it's become a big thing, there's a lot more farmers, so
Capitalism.
there's more people producing, so the price comes down.
But to be a real organic farm, you have to be hundreds of miles away from regular farmers, so bees and stuff don't transport the poison that they.
And then,
Stuff like that.
so
If
it's
the people
probably
want it, the
liable for
capitalists will
some.
produce it. You've got
That's what I-
the motivation, people want this. So there's a need of this product. That's exactly what you were saying. It just automatically
No,
creates, not that somebody sitting in Washington, well, I think we'll do organic.
I just watched my.
The way I see that industry,
Central
Yeah,
planning.
cider.
and this goes back to the 40s, the 30s, the 20s, even earlier than that, there was no such thing as fertilizers or pesticides to infest the ground and to grow products in large quantities.
Yeah.
Everything was done organically, pretty much. That's how it
Oh,
was,
yeah.
as far as I see it. And then when they came out with this, with the pesticide, they want things to be grown in abundance. This is where the chemicals went into the vegetables. Now they have a separation to say, if you want good food, natural food, food that is not infected with pesticides, then you have to go that way. They actually divided the food. They formed two divisions now. And the reality is, and you're a doctor, you have been for a long time, is that most of the diseases that people suffer from today is because of the pesticides and the chemicals that put in a lot of that food. And it may take 17, 20 years for it to actually affect the body, but that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that people
Oh,
can't
no.
die,
Yeah.
because we all have to die. But,
Oh,
today's widespread diseases as a
Yeah, but-
result of that.
Yeah, but a lot of that stuff's a racket because now they have organic hand cream. Now, come on. And if you look at the ingredients and Suave hand cream and some organic hand cream, it's the exact same stuff in the same order. So how can that be, you know what I mean? It's nonsense. A lot
Oh,
of
that's it.
who regulates it?
Well, regulation will not help.
So what about this?
Regulation will only make things worse.
So what about this?
Regulation always makes things worse. Whenever the one thing I was trying to say earlier, the one thing I was trying to say earlier is that God is the one that authored mankind, and he gave certain gifts to mankind. The first gift he gave was the gift of family. And family's job is to procreate and bring forth life. The next gift he gave, and he gave marriage too, so that you could have family. The next gift he gave was he gave in Genesis chapter 9 government, and government's job is to prosecute and to restrain and evil. That's its only job. In Genesis 9, he said, now if the problem we had in Genesis 6 where people were murdering each other, and God says, and you noticed your conscience, which told you not to kill, was not sufficient to stop people from killing, so now I'm going to give government, and government has the ability for capital punishment, and if anybody dares to take the life of another human being, then you take their life so they can't kill anyone else. And that's what government is, for the restraint of evil. Now listen to me carefully. That's all God gave government for. That's it. Government is a hammer to hammer evil.
Yeah.
And then he gave, if you will, he gave the temple and the Bible to promote good. So I got something to promote good, I got something to restrain evil. Now here's the problem that we have done in the past 100 years in America. We've made government our God. And whenever there's a problem, how can government solve it? And we've brought a hammer into every situation. And we've destroyed healthcare. And we've destroyed the building of automobiles. And we've done, that's all a hammer can do is destroy something. So whenever you bring regulators and hammers in, they destroy stuff. I watched them destroy medicine in the 40 years I was in it, from 1978 to whatever, 2018, just destroy the industry and then point the finger at the doctors and say, it's your fault. We weren't destroying it. We didn't write these stupid regulations. I watched them destroy the medical insurance industry. The medical insurance industry doesn't want to say you can't have this scam. The medical insurance industry would like the liberty to make different policies for different peoples in different states and even sell across state lines, but the government won't let it. The government comes in, so you bring regulators into the farming industry and they'll destroy anything you bring a hammer into. It doesn't build it, it hammers it down and destroys it. It's only meant for one purpose: get rid of criminals. So regular people can live their lives peaceably. And now it's upside down. If anything, the sad thing is, because now good is evil and evil is good, the hardworking people are beaten up by the government, and the criminals, they coddle. And criminals are coddled. And so this guy commits a crime and they let him off. But you, honey, you, a good working citizen, let me catch you once drunk behind that wheel, and I don't know what I'll do to you, but I'll bring the hammer down on you and sue you and take your house. And so the good people are getting hammered. Everything's upside down now. But government's a hammer. That's all it is. You don't want to involve in stuff that doesn't belong. Yeah.
Can you name somebody, anybody, can anybody give me something that the government has ever solved? We've had the war on drugs, the war on poverty.
It can't.
Go ahead, I'm listening.
It can't.
What has the government solved?
The only,
They're in the business of making things worse because that's their business. Because you need them, they want to extend themselves.
well,
They never solve anything.
that's because
Use more money.
that's because we, Martin Luther King, one of the great ones, and many other white people have done the same thing, have wanted to make government our God. So when there's a problem, what are you gonna do? But they're not God. They're just an instrument to get rid of evil. When they did what they were supposed to do and put criminals in jail and protected our borders, things were fine and America went like this for the first 100 years. But once you made government bigger, America's been going down.
Business is staying in business.
It's a
That's what they're
vicious
business
cycle,
for.
you know.
They're not business.
It's a vicious cycle.
Like you said right here in the book. That's
Because,
Ecclesiastes. There's no anything under the sun.
When I was on the railroad making $60,000 or $70,000 a year. The federal government was taking out $11,000 in taxes from me. So that's the only reason I went into thinking
And
about buying a
AOC
house,
wants
so I didn't
70%.
Guys,
They was taking
$7 a year to
We need
spend
to
as they
distribute
want.
that.
And the senators get $3 million a year to spend as they want. So why would you wanna be a senator and a senator?
I'll get her attention. Are we done?
That stupid girl. That was the
Sure, they
bartender.
take
She's
over a
dumb.
third of our